Welcome to our presentation session. Today I'll be teaching you how to effectively present and at the same time answer your professor's question professionally. In this session, I will talk about two main parts. The first part is what are some skills that you could use in your presentation session, and the second part will incorporate things that you should be wary of during the Q&A session. So let's get started. First of all, let's take a look at the presentation session. What should I be doing during a presentation or project? What is my role in the team, and whether I should present a lot or simply say a few words? Well, these are all things that I would like you to keep in mind. First thing is teamwork is always essential in presentation. After working with your fellow students for a semester, when you're presenting and you're not close or even you're not supportive to each other, the audience and the professors can definitely see that. So what you should do is also bond well with your teammates and ensure that you have perfect coordination and have well practiced before the actual presentation. Having that said, I do think that creating the synergy and supporting each other through how you're presenting and delivering your message is extremely important. Second point is to understand and leverage on each other's strengths. For example, some students are simply very timid and shy when presenting. So does it mean that they should not present at all? Or does it mean that they should not be even on the stage? Well, everyone should present. But how can we properly utilize each and every individual strength? Is that some students might be more comfortable presenting with numbers or things that they can see. Some students are very good at storytelling. So by identifying your teammates' skills over the course of 3 to 4 months will be very important for your project. Last but not the least, try to always be specific and answer questions or even present collectively, in a sense that you would use words such as we believe, we have conducted, and we firmly understand. By using more we in your presentation, you not only show your teamwork coordination, but at the same time, you also show that how well prepared your research is and also for the presentation. So let's move on to some of the skills that you could possibly have for your presentation. Here I've jotted down a lot of different text and also sentences for you to effectively use in your presentation. So I'd like to speak about a few of them. The first one is by starting off with a rhetorical question. For example, most often if you start with a self-introduction, it gets a bit boring. But if you start with a question that can prompt the audience to think about what you're doing, the question itself, or even by pausing a bit, just like this, then you would effectively allow the audience to swallow your message and also get things started before they listen to a gruesome 20 minutes presentation. So by starting off, I would always say that a very positive and engaging presentation style is always effective in alluring your audience and having them captivated throughout the entire presentation. But most important of all, I believe that different section requires different skills. For example, in your introduction, you may wish to use a more conveying tone and as well as one that is having a central message and at the same time delivering something that is more emotional based so that the audience will be able to resonate with what you're talking about. By starting off with a lot of information is not necessarily a good idea because they would simply feel that numbers itself, let's say 70%, is not really relatable. It doesn't really touch upon their heart. Now, moving on, when you're doing your analysis, that is where your numbers come in. And that is how you could utilize your team's collective synergy and effort throughout so many weeks delivered to your audience. Here, you could say that you have conducted a lot of research, extensive research, and also identified several potentials, situation where the company can improve on. And here, I would like to say that after that, you would have to move on to your solution. And we believe that our solution can improve X, Y, Z, or even work on problems from ABC will be very effective in ensuring that the audience know you're tackling these 3 problems. So all these phrases here are not just effective in terms of how it shows your synergy and presentation, but then they're also very good in showing how you can make a presentation smooth. But here I would like to remind you one very important thing. It is not a very good idea to use very technical terms, difficult words, or even memorize your script with a cue card. Because when you're doing that, you would be very unnatural. Just like how I'm talking to you guys right now, I'm not having a script and it sounds very conversational. So moving on, I would like to tell you and give you some tips on what you should not do in your presentation. The first thing is definitely lack eye contact. I think eye contact is very important because when you're in front of the screen or even the stage, your audience will be always focused on you or your slides. By showing that you're actually communicating and delivering a message to them is super important, such as your body movements, hand gestures, or even how well you're able to articulate your message. The second point is how some presentations would always lack storytelling elements. And by storytelling, we don't necessarily mean getting a script off the storybook or even being very poetic. What we mean is that your solution and what you're working on should always have a core message. But bear in mind that you should not have multiple core messages. It should not fluctuate from time to time, or you should not incorporate a lot of elements, because simply by bombarding your audience with all this information gets a bit difficult to swallow. Last but not the least, to always practice prior to your presentation. And by practicing, I have a very practical tip for you. That is, I myself would often go to a park or even other places with a lot of audience, and I would practice my pitch in front of them. Simply because it trains me not to be nervous when I'm actually presenting, and so that I do not make mistakes when I'm presenting. And even if I do, I'm able to change as well as adapt because I'm not having a script and I could always refer back to the slides when necessary. Here, moving on, let's talk about the Q&A session. Very often when judges or the audience or even anyone that asks a question, the first thing that we have in mind is it that we're not doing enough? Are we wrong? Are we being criticized? Well, this is one part that I would like to help you adjust your emotional state first. When people have questions, it is either that they're curious about what you're doing, or they might have some misconceptions, or they simply do not get what you're doing. So do not feel like you're criticized, and always address your professors and the audience professionally. By using phrases such as, "Thank you very much for your question," and "We're more than happy and delighted to answer your questions," will be very effective in first addressing them professionally, and also to know that you're actually paying attention to what they're asking. Second, to resonate with them. Understand the perspectives of your audience. When they have such a question, within 5 seconds, you should always think about, why would you ask such a question? Why would they need this question? So you should ensure that everyone feels that you truly understand them and you also know what they're asking. So that is why when answering these questions, you should try to think from their perspective and not use a lot of information or restate what you have explained in the presentation session. Third, always be information driven. We are all human beings, and there are always things that we don't understand or things that we don't know about a particular industry, a company, or even anything. So that is why it may be a lack of information, and by being information driven through your appendices, you illustrate to the audience that we indeed have conducted a lot of these research to justify our solution, and that is actually the case across the world. And that is actually the case across different industries and companies. So this is extremely persuasive because numbers mean a lot, more than simply something qualitative or something that is opinionated. So here are some useful words and phrases for your Q&A session. Always be thankful for the questions that you're asked by saying thank you for your question, and even allowing yourself or your team to clarify the questions, because it is very important that you treat your audience with respect and not feel ashamed or criticized. And the audience can definitely tell when you feel threatened. And when you do feel threatened, it does affect your performance and how they think of your group. More importantly, you should be information driven, data driven, and also number driven. So that is why we would always use our research, data, and information done previously to answer the questions. Last but not the least, I would also like to talk about how you as a team can coordinate better and work with each other to synergize and answer a question. For example, if that student is responsible for a particular part, say analysis, he or she can be responsible for answering the Q&A session because they would know that part very well, while other teammates can also complement them in that particular part. Because what I'm talking about is that often when you're in a Q&A session, everyone wants to answer, or sometimes you may even dwell on a point or a question for more than 2-3 minutes. So you might be over-explaining things, and that is where the problem comes. Over-explaining or explaining too much, incorporating things that are not relevant, might not be so good in answering the direct question. So you might as well as let the audience or your professors ask more questions so that everyone can have their questions answered and everyone will be happy after your presentation. So what are some don'ts in your Q&A session? Do not get personal, and always take a question with respect and understand where they're coming from. We should never present on behalf of our opinions, but be information and data driven. While throughout the 3-4 months you have been working on this project or presentation, I'm sure you have already somewhat become an expert in this industry and field that you could use and as well as educate your audience. Second, do not correct your judges by being offensive and telling them that they're wrong, what they're saying does not make sense, or even what they're saying is not relevant. You would simply make the other person feel very bad, and the person might be asking you genuinely out of curiosity. So that is where you step in as a role to educate them, to help them, and also to ensure that their concerns have been mitigated and as well understood. Last but not the least, I've been mentioning this point several times already. Do not get very defensive, as judges are also human beings. So we as human beings should always treat each other with respect and also understand the perspectives that they're coming from. More importantly, he or she might be using the perspective of a company, of an individual, the targeted group, or simply other stakeholders. And you might be coming from a company's perspective. Note that there's always a mutual interest clash, and also when you come from different perspectives, you will require different solutions. So all in all, I hope that the presentation and Q&A tips will be very effective in helping you deliver your next pitch, message, and also to your intended audience. Thank you.